Hello and welcome to my Detroit Become Human playthrough. Now we've actually played a couple of missions already and we're now playing as Connor, who is a police android special model. And just look at these visuals. I'm going to be going on and on and on about them. They are just amazing, really good. The cinematic camera angles, the lighting, the actual graphic fidelity and the outstanding motion capture makes this game look great. Now the one problem you might have with this game is it is a sort of story game rather than a more traditional game. So some people have likened it to a choose your own adventure, and in some ways yes, it is that. You don't have complete freedom of movement and complete freedom of action per se, and some bits are very heavily telegraphed, but you're playing it for the story and the cool variations. Now I've played this game 3 times. This is actually my second playthrough. And in each of those playthroughs I've had totally different results, partially based on decisions you make early in the game as well as within the scene, and that's something that this game rewards you with. Each playthrough is all 8 to 10 hours I would say, but you can actually replay scenes via these things called checkpoints, but also a decision you might make in, let's say, scene 3 might not actually have an impact till scene 8. So depending on what you do in scene 3, you'll get a totally different thing in scene 8 happen. So yeah, it's been pretty interesting. This playthrough I'm trying to be a little bit more militaristic. My first playthrough I was desperate to get everyone to get the best outcome, and I did a reasonably good job at that, I think, in my first playthrough. There are actually 3 main characters that you will play in the game. So you've got Connor here, who's looking for Lieutenant Anderson, who he's just found, but you've also got Marcus and Kara. Now Marcus is a sort of domestic servant for an artist who ends up becoming a bit of a freedom fighter for the Deviants, as they're known, and Kara is a domestic servant who rescues a small child called Alice and is basically just trying to escape to freedom and avoid persecution. Connor's job is to hunt down the Deviants, so his job is effectively to hunt down Marcus and Alice and any other Deviants and basically bring them in. So he's a bit like a sort of Blade Runner-y type character, I guess, and he works for CyberLife, obviously the creators of the androids, and his handler is someone called Amanda, who you'll meet later on in the game. Now at various points you'll get these decisions, and I think I went with persist, and you might have noticed underneath the decision icons there's a little white bar that counts down, and it will automatically default to a particular option if you don't choose one of your own. Now when you do a particular option, that will sometimes create a different influence with either an individual or a faction. So Hank just now wasn't very happy with what I did, so a little red arrow appeared pointing downwards saying that I'm not as popular with Hank as I used to be. If I make myself popular with Hank, I get a little blue arrow. Now that's really going to annoy Hank, getting rid of his drink. So as you can see, a big red arrow there. He's now really anti-Connor. Now he's pretty anti-androids anyway, and he really dislikes having Connor assigned to him. And this is what's interesting about this universe. It's a world where computer AI has become so good and robotics has become so good that we've got these androids who look like humans, but I think the game's set a little bit too near to the current day. I think it's 2038, and the problem with that is a little smile coming up here. Yeah, very well captured little bit there. Anyway, the problem is with it being set in 2038, the robots have too much cool tech. They've got like chameleon abilities, self-repair, self-management. It's all a little bit too advanced, I think, for just 20 years in the future. I think maybe 50 years in the future, a little bit more believable. 100 years would be even better. So anyway, I'm trying to get on Hank's side a little bit because I don't want him hostile. So I agree with him and he's happy, so I get a little bit of a bonus. But that conflicts with my master's orders, because although I'm working with Hank, I'm actually working for CyberLife. And as I say, Connor is a very interesting character. He's one of the best stories, actually. But I mean, look at the lighting effects here. They're just fantastic. Anyway, this must look great on a PS4 Pro with that sort of pseudo 4K output. I'm not sure how well the PS4 would handle this game, because I notice in some really heavy scenes you can get a little bit of frame judder, but most of the time, I'd say 80% of the time, it runs silky smooth. and then the final 20% of the time, you know, it doesn't affect your gameplay, but you do notice the odd little slowdown or stutter. So really, really impressive. And this is the best game of the series as well, because you've got much more free choice, much more options here, and also you can actually see the impact of your choices in something called the flow chart. So here you go. It does remind you that you can switch your camera angle by pressing R1. And this is my scanning ability, so whenever you see this pop up, I'm scanning the environment to see if there's anything interesting to see. In particular, there are little booklets that you can unlock and read, and yeah, they can have some fairly interesting articles. So anyway, we're now into the main part of this particular scene, which is investigating the murder of Carlos Ortiz, who's basically a drug dealer as far as I can tell. And we are basically going to try and work out what happened and is there any android involvement, and if there is, where's the android gone and can I capture him? Now, as you can see here, written on the wall in blood is "I am alive," and this is something that you'll see a lot with Deviants, which are the self-aware androids. They basically have decided that they are a new form of life and they want some independence, and this is where some of the critics have criticised this game. It is pretty heavy-handed with analogies to human history, so the slavery and civil rights movements and stuff like that. There's also gender issues do come up, and also kind of how will humans cope with androids who basically have taken over from them, and therefore there's mass unemployment. However, because androids are so common, even unemployed people can potentially get an android. Now, whether that's because they get it via benefits or they buy it, and because it's self-regulating, they don't need to sell it per se to live. So there is a little bit of an interesting story in here, and it's handled relatively well, but a little bit heavy-handed in places. But here you go. We're now doing the special features of examination. Now, this feature of Connor does sort of get used a little bit by the other android characters you play, but you know, Connor is the best at scanning a scene, looking for clues and picking out stuff, and he's also got this reconstruct ability. So once he's scanned for clues, you press the square button and eventually that fills up and it unlocks the scene, and then you get to look for extra clues in the timeline. So here you go, we've worked out that he's fell over and come from a different direction, so we trace him all the way back to the kitchen eventually, and there was someone else in the room stabbing him, so I mean that was pretty obvious, but we now know that for a fact because of our reconstruct ability. And whenever you see a little padlock, that's like unlocking either dialogue or scene options.
He was stabbed 28 times.
Yeah. Seems like the killer really
So
had
there
it.
you go. I hope you're appreciating the mocap here. The game is just flawless to look at. Occasionally the textures can be a little bit iffy, but most of the time they're great, and you're not seeing the game as good as it actually looks on a PlayStation here. There has been a slight loss in quality in my opinion compared to what I saw actually on screen, but it's pretty close. So very impressive, very impressive. It'd be great to see this on a PC, to be honest, where you could play in really super high res, you know, true 4K and all that stuff. But yeah, I think a mouse and keyboard would not be so fun to play this game. It is definitely designed around a controller. But yeah, really, really good game. And I hope the Detroit Become Human world gets some development, really, although I'm not sure it's going to. It'd be great to see it as a role-playing game, for example. But that's something you could easily do yourself. Anyway, continuing to work things out, we've now confirmed that an android was almost certainly the murderer, and of course that makes the android a deviant. And this is something else that humanity struggles with, is, you know, when your life is so dominated by androids, what do you do when they go rogue? So here you go, lots of clues, these little yellow symbols. So here you go, little nightclub here, Eden Club. Basically it's a a club for androids to be exploited in the sex trade. So it does deal with some pretty dark themes, and I quite like it. I think it's a fairly mature game, but as I say, some of the critics have pointed out that some of the bits they've got are a little bit heavily-handedly dealt with, and yeah, that's a fair criticism, I guess, but I can look past that because it's just, for me, quite an enjoyable game experience, and the multiple stories that they've weaved together means it's an absolute technical marvel, both from a graphic point of view, but also from a sort of project management point of view, to have all these different threads that kind of cross over, diverge, interlink, have an impact kind of deep down into gameplay. So something you do in the first 10 minutes could potentially affect the last, like, I don't know, 9th hour of your game. And to keep all those threads kind of floating and doing, I mean, this to me is what Mass Effect 3 should have been. It should have been able to deal with those massive threads from Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2 to bring it all together, which is why I was so disappointed in Mass Effect 3. Now, obviously, some people, if you could have combined the Mass Effect 3 gameplay with the kind of storytelling of this, I think people would be going nuts for Mass Effect, and yeah, to me that's something that's very sad. This game does show it is possible to have multiple divergent storylines just within a game, so you should easily be able to do that across a game series, but there you go. Now these little magazines here, they're a bit weird, and there are some kind of interesting stories to be read. Now, you don't need to read them in-game too much, because when you discover them, they do get sort of unlocked in a menu, so you'll tend to find in my playthrough here that I just quickly skim through them and then read them kind of out in menus later. But here you go, we're now going to find the murder weapon here, and we get potentially some extra information here from a bat, which, oops, yeah, here you go. Had a little bit of trouble. I was getting slightly distracted whilst playing this playthrough, so a couple of key presses were not quite on point. So here you go. Oh, so we have discovered now that the Deviant was attacked with a bat. So was that in self-defense? Ah, here you go. The Deviant took the knife in self-defense. So it's not that the guy with the bat was defending himself from the Deviant. It was actually the Deviant was attacked by his owner and then basically acted in self-defense to basically try and keep himself alive. And this is what's interesting, is you can feel a lot of sympathy for the androids in this game, but as Connor, you don't care. They are Deviants, they need to be brought to justice, and that's something that over the game will possibly change, and you've got to decide, you know, do you want to kind of act more for the androids or more for the humans? Now, obviously, the other two characters, Marcus and Kara, they have a slightly different agenda to Connor, and at one stage you do get all three characters sort of coming together a bit more, and you can decide what to do. So I'm making sure I've desperately scanned for everything I can before just wandering off. Now, as you can see there, when you do a scan, it will also tell you how well you're doing on your mission. So I've got 8 out of 10 clues, and for some reason, there you go, I managed to find the clue. I'm trying to remember where the 10th clue is here, and I know where it is. I walked past it right at the start of the scene here, and it's frustrating me because I'm, you know, whilst I'm actually playing and thinking of what to record, I'm like, oh dear, where is the clue? It must be back here. And at some stage I will finally find it, but yeah, I mean, it can be a problem with the game that if you're not paying attention, you can easily miss something. You spend 5-10 minutes hunting for the damn clue that you missed, but I will find it soon, I promise. But yeah, I mean, every moment of this game just visually is mind-blowing. So I really enjoy it just from the sheer aesthetics, really. Oh, here you go. I think this is the last clue here. Yeah, so he is involved in this horrible drug called red ice, and does seem to be a big problem for humanity. So here you go, that's it. We've got all the clues, so we can now talk to Hank.
Lieutenant, I think I figured out what happened.
Oh, yeah? Shoot, I'm all ears.
It all started in the kitchen.
Now I think I do in this playthrough deliberately make a mistake to see what happens, but I wasn't committed enough to totally muck it up. But in theory, yeah, you could deliberately fail a mission, which makes Connor doubt himself.
Without a weapon.
No, that can't be right. It doesn't fit the evidence.
With the bat.
That lines up with the evidence. Go on.
Obviously, Hank's sort of worked it out already, and he's testing how good is Connor.
The android stabbed the victim.
So the android was trying to defend us.
Now what's interesting about the Hank character, he really doesn't like androids, but over the game, Connor can persuade him to either hate or like androids more or less. So that's pretty interesting in my opinion. So anyway, we've got a nice graphic representation of what happened here. So yeah, it's kind of quite nicely done actually.
They tried to get away from the android. Alright, that makes sense.
The android murdered the victim with the knife.
Okay. Your theory's not
So
totally
now
ridiculous.
the problem is, where did the android go? So this is something that you need to
It was
work out.
damaged by the bat and lost some hearing.
And what's interesting is the androids have this thing called blue blood, which, as it says here, it powers their biocomponents, and without it, they can't really function. So one of the problems with going Deviant is obviously you lose your easy access to the maintenance process, and I believe the androids are meant to be able to live for about 170 years without any maintenance. So yeah, that's something that could be interesting to see how that shapes out in the game. If you know, what happens if all the androids basically die off, and yeah, you get to see a little bit of that potentially, depending on your choices, because the Deviants can become bigger, more powerful, and effectively scare the humans. So yeah, very interesting. And of course, depending on the route you go, humans can either decide that they really dislike androids, or they can become very sympathetic to androids. So yeah, that's definitely something that's interesting. So anyway, we think we've worked out where the android is, so we are going to go and have a look for him, and he wasn't behind the curtain. So where is he? Well, we saw a handprint on the ceiling, so he's probably up in the roof. So we need to find something that we can climb up on. So we've got to have a hunt around for that. And yeah, that chair looks useful.
Hey, what are you doing with that chair?
I'm going to check something.
Check something.
So here you go. Is the android up in the roof, or has he escaped? We'll find out. Well, that looks a bit suspicious. Let's see what we can do. Now, Connor doesn't always have a weapon, but he is actually quite adept with one. And during the various missions, you might find you get to do a little bit of shooting, and yeah, that can be quite fun, deciding whether or not to shoot people or not. And yeah, the old sort of jumpy scare thing, mannequin. And the game does use that at times, but on the whole, you know, it tends to be much more like a traditional sort of text adventure type idea. So there you go, something running away there. So the android is obviously still on site, and we've got to decide what to do with him, basically. So let's go have a look. Yep, there he is, and we've got a little red glow, which is typically a deviant sort of behaviour. You'll notice the androids have these little LED things in their temple, and when they're red it normally means they're deviant.
I was just defending myself. He was gonna kill me. I'm begging you. Don't tell him.
Connor, what the fuck is going on up there?
There, no sympathy from Connor there. So there you go, deviant located, and yeah, the facial capture technology there is doing a really good job at capturing the acting. Anyway, there you go, that was Connor investigating a deviant, and now we're going to get a timeline filling in, showing all the things we did and could have done and other bits we might have done. There you go. So that was a scene from Detroit Become Human.